this is one of the big reasons why I wanted to talk to you, because from my vantage point, you go into data from other countries, and I had known since I was a kid information about China and the potential serious, really civilizational risk that a place like China might be facing with the demographics in that country, where there are millions and millions and millions more men than there are women, and what that can mean when you have, inevitably, if it is a monogamous culture, millions of single, non-mating, non-dating men who are just lingering around. And it didn't occur to me that something akin to that might be possible in our own country. And I think your book tries to approach what the reality is and attempts to explain the situation in the country. How do you think about that as a risk factor for America specifically? Maybe what do you think are the real challenges, given the data that we've already talked about during the
Okay, can I start with China?
Please.
So I think whether or not you consider it a risk really depends upon your vantage point. If you're the parent of a young man in China, or if you're a young man who's single and struggling with being single, it's an enormous risk. It's a creation of frustration and sadness. If you are a government official or an economic planner in China, you may have a very different view of this, because the latest research on this, and I cite one of these studies in Date-onomics. It was from a Columbia University professor. I mean, he found that I don't have the passage in front of me, but I think he concluded that 10 to 20% of the GDP growth in China over the past 20 years was a byproduct of men having to compete harder for women, and men having to earn more and be harder working in order to compete for a wife. Now, this may sound very Machiavellian and kind of harsh, but from an economic standpoint, it's pretty likely that the shortage of women in China has been good for their economy. I'm not justifying any of the horrors that created the shortage of women in China, everything from the one-child policy to infanticide, to be frank. Yeah. But the byproduct has been probably a stronger economy in China. So I wonder, I don't know any government officials in China, but I do wonder if they view this as a negative. I hope they do, but I'm worried they don't. As for the US, I guess I'm always, whether it's China or here, I am a little reluctant to pass grandiose, moral judgments on the state of the culture. So let's say the byproduct here is that women are harder working, which is one of, similar, the parallel of China is that the research shows that when men are in undersupply, women tend to be more focused on earnings and career, because they know they may have to go it alone as a parent. And so another byproduct may be that men get married later or don't get married at all and are more likely to play the field. And the whole romantic culture is more libertine. And I'm really careful not to portray myself as a giant defender of the institution of marriage. Yeah. I don't believe marriage is for everyone. And I think it's okay if fewer people opt for marriage. But I do think there's a real value in kind of shedding or exposing this problem to sunlight. So if you are a marriage-minded woman, somebody who puts a high priority on marriage, I think there's real value in being aware of what's going on demographically and making choices accordingly. but I'm not so willing to go so far as we're heading towards some cultural meltdown because there aren't enough college grad men. Although at the same, I mean, I would like our educational system to fix some of the problems, some of the boy problems in our schools, but I don't see some catastrophe if the current situation continues.
Yeah. My take on your reading, and you alluded to this already in the conversation about former coworkers who were having horror stories and a hard time in the dating market, and they seemed bewildered. They couldn't quite make sense of what was happening. And I think your book and others seem to provide a very good reason as to an explanation, again, without any moral attachment to the outcome necessarily, that it is an explanation that I think a lot of people would agree makes a lot of sense.